What are the key messages of the SREX report?
Okay, thank you. So the governments of the world asked the IPCC to prepare a special report because they were seeing changes in disasters in their countries and were worried. So the IPCC involved 220 authors from 62 countries over 2 years to prepare the report. And what it found was that climate extremes are changing in some regions and some extremes are changing, and that some of those are actually down to climate change already. But it also found that where there were trends in disaster losses, that we've been seeing this upward trend, that was primarily related to changes in exposure rather than climate change at this time. But certainly that the future looks quite different, with climate change playing a much bigger role in disaster losses in the future.
What does the SREX report tell us that we didn't know already?
Okay, well, it certainly confirms a number of things, and it confirms that for every additional tonne of greenhouse gas we put out, we increase the chance of a flood or a drought happening in the future, whether at home or abroad or anywhere around the world. So you've got a situation where we can now say with much greater certainty about the future direction of changing extremes, and we can do that on a sub-regional basis. And so for the first time, the IPCC presents reports on trends in extreme events at a sub-regional level. So you can go and look at your particular region of the world and see what the future holds in terms of extremes of temperature or of rainfall. I think that's quite different. I think the other thing is it really brings together a considerable body of literature and experience in what you can actually do about tackling extreme events at different scales. Probably the most comprehensive assessment in that regard, and makes a set of recommendations about the kinds of things that governments should be doing to deal with this challenge.
Is there any part of the world that should be particularly worried?
Well, I think that's true. There is part of the world that should be worried, particularly those already that have high levels of vulnerability, that are in very exposed locations. So taking, for example, small island states in the Pacific or the Caribbean, particularly those low level that are experiencing sea level rise over and above, the kind of storm surges, as well as actually some big coastal cities we've got to be concerned about. Mumbai, for example, cities in Asian deltas, Ho Chi Minh City, and others, which, very exposed already to cyclone storm surges, extremes of rainfall, and, need to really make sure that all the measures are in place to build their resilience over time.
Now, the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, CDKN, has prepared 3 regional reports on lessons from SREX. What are those all about?
Well, the IPCC Special Report is written by scientists in a language that other scientists can understand, but maybe in not the kind of way that would be the most accessible to those who are making policy or delivering programs on the ground. And it also doesn't include chapters that are on particular regions of the world. And so what we thought was it would be really good to promote access to the report by preparing regional summaries for Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa and Asia, to make sure that the findings are presented to policymakers in the clearest possible way in those regions.
Is there an example of a developing country that's doing a particularly good job of planning for climate extremes already?
Well, one that I know well is the Philippines. It's a country that's exposed to just about every extreme you can think of. So they've had to really take it very seriously, because there's a considerable chance of losing a lot of GDP and people and wealth and things like that. So what they've managed to do is to develop a really robust national system where they have strong institutions nationally trying to reduce risk to disasters, and that actually flows down to local government level, and even within each individual community in the Philippines there's a community disaster management committee. And the important thing about the Philippines is that that's backed up by national legislation that includes climate change and changing climate extremes. It's supported well by science and scientific institutions nationally, and that there is money for it coming from central budget disaggregated into local budgets to actually take measures to reduce risk. So I think an example to all of us, but it also very much because they're on the very front line of dealing with these issues.
How should developing country decision makers respond to the SREX report?
Okay, well, firstly, they should appreciate that their type of disasters that they've seen in the past might not be the type of disasters they see in the future. So that's one. And there's also potential for increased uncertainty about what they might face. So what they need to really do is understand those risks, assess them, be clear on what the future holds as best as we can possibly know. And then actually take decisions based on that risk information. They can either choose to reduce the risks, to try and transfer some of the risks, potentially through insurance mechanisms, or build up the capacity to respond to disasters when they happen. Okay, and so there's a suite of options for each individual climate extreme and potential disaster they face, and decisions need to be taken on where they invest precious resources.